There's this TikTok video I came across that got me thinking about a larger structural problem. I'm going to censor her name because she's already gotten a lot of harassment and misogynistic comments in response to her videos, and I think that's gross. If anything, it just gives her more ammo, but I think the video itself is a little disgusting.
I used to think men were shit because they were raised like shit. I am starting to believe, as the parent of a little boy, that they all start out like shit and they have to be raised out of it. My 6-year-old son, oh my god, he's been on one lately. He's been having a really hard time with a lot of stuff. He kicked his sister in the face and then blamed it on being sad that my grandma died.
Yeah, this video sucks. I hate the mentality that goes into it, but what's even more annoying is that because the responses to it have been mostly dismissive and misogynistic, all she's done since she posted this video is double down, because a lot of people give her more ammo to prove her larger point about men. I am neither a parent nor a woman. I'm queer, and I've dealt with kids my entire life, having to babysit for most of it. So on some level, I can understand what it's like, but not in the exact same way, so I'm not going to dismiss her experiences here. Obviously, dealing with kids is fucking annoying and frustrating because they're inexperienced and they're not nearly as knowledgeable about the world, and they're high maintenance. No one's denying that. That's not the problem here, and I'm not going to pretend that misogyny is not a thing. It very obviously is, and only gets more intense with every passing year. Some of the men crying about how lonely they are, those were the same men talking about going their own way like 20 years ago. I guess it's fine for them to go their own way, but the minute women start to do the same thing, suddenly we're in a loneliness crisis, guys. I'll get back to that point later. I more or less want to focus on my personal issue with this video, which is that she's talking about her son's behavior as a defectiveness that comes with being born male. A young child who is 6 years old kicked his sister and when confronted about it, reached for emotional cover. Kids do that shit. It's not because he's a boy, it's because he's a kid. Children of every gender deflect, manipulate, test boundaries, and behave badly when they're overwhelmed. When I was a kid, we had a girl staying with us that was the same age as me. She was my cousin. And she dropped a monster truck on my head because I was laying down on the spot of the floor that she wanted to lay down on. She was raised well, but she was upset over something trivial and acted like an asshole because she was a kid. Where does this behavior your son engages in come from? I don't think it's coming from him being born male. Going based on the evidence I have here, I think it might have something to do with you, because you're the parent. You are the moral guide, and rather than look at his bad actions as something wrong with his behavior, you're looking at it as something wrong with him. Something wrong with what he was born as, his nature, his biology, the very thing that he is, which is just a standard you can't put a 6-year-old through. They don't understand society. They don't understand gender dynamics or misogyny because it's a fucking 6-year-old. Yes, you do have to teach your son right from wrong, but this belief that all boys are rotten and have to be taught not to be rotten, to me anyway, shows a lack of accountability or self-reflection on yourself as a parent. The comments are also just fucking insane. Right. So when boys are allowed to make fun of girls, get away with things because boys will be boys, or when little girls are taught that it's okay to be picked on and teased because it means that the boy likes them, it's entirely the parent's fault and has nothing to do with societal pressure or gender norms. And yet I'm sure if this was a single father, or a father in general, you would not have issues with it, especially if it was talking about a little girl who was acting out. Oh my god. First, the points that are actually valid. Yes, boys will be boys is a terrible excuse that turns confused and angry little boys into dangerous and hateful men. Yes, teaching girls that being picked on means a boy likes them is harmful, and I've honestly never understood that mentality. Yes, societal pressure and gender norms are real forces that shape behavior. These are legitimate points, and anyone engaging seriously with gender and child development would agree with them. They're also not what anyone was arguing about! The original video did not critique gender norms. It didn't call out bad socialization. It said boys just start out defective. That is not a structural critique. That is a claim about human nature that is neither based in science nor healthy to adopt when raising a child. What gets me is the part about how you wouldn't say this to a father talking about his daughter. Not only would I, you would too, So you can't even operate under your own false equivalence because you're just as much of a hypocrite. I absolutely would, because that's an insane thing to say, and this false equivalence is just fucking gross. If you could get your head out of your ass for more than 5 seconds and genuinely look inward, maybe you'll understand that treating your son's bad actions as anything other than a reflection of your parenting will only push him away from you. You don't get to say boys are born bad and then when challenged pivot to, well, what about toxic masculinity? Because those are different conversations. And blurring them doesn't strengthen the argument, it just makes it harder to have an honest one. Although she's made it pretty clear that she's really not interested in having one, because even the most respectful comments disagreeing with her are just dismissed as misogynistic. It's nothing new. I see this kind of content all the time, and unfortunately it gets worse with every passing year, as does the abundant amount of misogyny I witness as well. I kind of hate being alive right now. Every time some video like this pops up, the comments are filled with people saying the most heinous, awful shit about women, and I hate being alive. But it got me thinking about a lot of things surrounding gender and misogyny and the ways in which men are propagandized and a lot of other things. This woman, if I had to guess, obviously hates men. She almost wears it like a badge of honor, which I can only assume has to do with traumas relating to misogyny that I am certain she's experienced in the past. But I'm not going to play armchair psychologist. That's what keeps rattling around in my head, because the shitty things that she said in that video, they couldn't have come from nowhere, but the same thing could also be said about the awful comment section and the shitty things said to her in response. I don't know her story. I'm not going to pretend to, but somewhere along the line, all we know is that a lot of people got hurt, and instead of processing that hurt, they weaponize it, and now we've got this feedback loop. Men being shitty to women, women expressing resentment towards men, men responding with cruelty, women using that cruelty as confirmation, men using that confirmation as justification, and round it goes, and nobody is actually getting what they need out of this exchange, and what I keep coming back to is that the people caught in the middle of this loop are sort of just seen as casualties. Queer people who deal with oppression on both sides, young women who are taught to live in fear of men, and young men who are still figuring out who they are, being told by one side that they're inherently broken, and by the other that their loneliness is women's fault. Neither of those things are true, by the way, and I think that's worth talking about. I do want to clarify who this video is actually for. It's aimed at the men in my audience, although to be fair, that's like most of my audience anyway. I do think women could get something out of this too, but the main goal here is to talk to young men that might be feeling a little lost. This video is for the guys who feel lonely, insecure, or unsure about where they're supposed to be going in life. I'm not going to pretend that I'm some kind of wise authority here. I'm simply not. In fact, I would wager to say I'm probably just as lost, confused, and fucked up as a lot of you are. I know what loneliness feels like. I know what insecurity feels like. I'm very familiar with that sense of isolation, self-doubts, having emotional needs that just aren't being met. And so that's what this video is going to be. It isn't exactly a secret that dating kind of sucks right now. To be fair, I don't think it's ever been easy, but over the past few years, it feels like something has shifted. People seem more isolated, more awkward, less willing to put themselves out there than they used to be. And part of that is probably the aftermath of COVID, which forced people into long periods of isolation and pushed a lot of our social lives online. And when your main way of meeting people becomes dating apps, social media, and algorithm-driven interactions, it inevitably changes how we relate to the people around us. But that's not the only factor. There's a growing divide between men and women online, fueled by things like incel culture, misogyny, misandry, and the endless cycle of resentment those communities carry. Add in a rough economy, the lingering expectation that men should pay for everything, and the fact that a lot of women are understandably frustrated with men for a variety of reasons that I'll get into across this video, and the whole situation starts to feel pretty bleak. Bleak, but not hopeless, mind you. Bleak, but not hopeless. Because as long as people enjoy dating, as long as people want to find love, as long as people are drawn to romantic connection, it will continue to exist, even if it's a little bit harder to find today than it might have been a few years ago. Dating right now often feels exhausting because standards feel impossibly high. If you don't immediately impress someone, you're treated as replaceable. If something about you isn't perfect, there are hundreds of other options. equally as unimpressive and shallow. Instead of clear communication, people ghost each other. Instead of forming connection, it starts to feel transactional, and it can leave people feeling invisible, replaceable, and objectified. A lot of women feel like they're only valued for their bodies. A lot of men feel like they're only valued for their money or what they can provide. And while dating has probably always had elements of that, it feels more obvious and more brutal now than I think it ever has before. The constant rejection certainly doesn't help either. Trying over and over again, getting brushed off before they even know who you are, or being dropped the moment someone finds something about you they can judge, really starts to get to you after a while. Dating can feel like this impossible mountain you're expected to climb, except every time you get close to the top, you're knocked all the way back down again, and you've got to start from square one. It's exhausting, and a lot of people are pretty frustrated, but despite all of that, they still crave connection, so they keep trying and keep running into the same brick wall, and that's not even accounting for people who already struggle with social anxiety or have difficulty talking to others, because underneath all of this, there's another layer of fear driving the whole dynamic. A lot of women are afraid of men because they're worried about being harassed, assaulted, or objectified. A lot of men are afraid of women because they're afraid of being judged, rejected, or seen as creepy. So when both sides are afraid of each other, it gets a little bit harder for anyone to actually connect. Don't even get me started with the problems gay and lesbian people face. Lesbians have a hard time actually communicating with other women because they can never tell if they're genuinely being serious with their feelings or just being nice. And gay men have a hard time coming out because they're afraid of being shamed for their sexuality or ridiculed with disgust. It's brutal from every angle, no matter what your orientation or gender is. In truth, in the wise words of my boy Nas, life's a bitch and then you die. That's why we get high. Because you never know when you're gonna go. He really did drop a homophobic slur on that album, didn't he? One thing I've noticed, especially online, is that a lot of men believe that women have it easy, and at the same time, a lot of women believe that men have it easy, but I think the reality is a lot less satisfying than either of these conclusions. I don't think anyone's got it easy. Life is difficult, confusing, and often painful for most people unless you happen to be a billionaire, and judging by the number of scandals, abuses of power, and deeply questionable friendships that seem to follow that particular class of people around, yeah, probably not the best example of how to live a healthy, meaningful life. The point is that this isn't a competition. I'm not here to argue that men suffer more than women or that women suffer more than men. I don't think pain really works like that, and for a lot of the young men watching this video, it might be surprising to hear this, but I also think women are lonely too, just in a different way. Everyone's dealing with fear, insecurity, trauma, unmet needs. Life itself is deeply painful, but instead of acknowledging that shared reality, I feel like we spend most of our time talking past each other, arguing about who has it worse, instead of actually trying to understand what's going wrong. And I think a lot of people take the cynical route because it's easier to ignore the positive side of things, but to tell you the truth, I actually believe most people are inherently good. I know that a lot of edgy, grimdark media would have you think that humans are fundamentally evil, but that's just not true. Most people, whether they're men, women, trans, or non-binary, are simply good at heart. Most men, for example, would never harm anyone. They just want connection, love, and purpose in their lives. Feeling lonely doesn't make you pathetic, it doesn't make you lesser or unlovable, and it certainly doesn't make you weak. I know that there's a narrative out there, especially online, that men are evil or trash, but that's just not accurate. The truth is, most men you meet on the streets are just normal people trying to live their lives. It's the same for women. That girl you're afraid to ask out is a normal person, and she's probably just as insecure as you are, probably doubts herself in ways you can't even see. What I'm getting at is that a lot of people have this bad habit of judging others before they even get to know them, and they don't even realize they're doing it. But the truth is, on average, people are just people. They're flawed. They're selfish, loving, hateful, kind, rude, considerate, and yes, shitty. But none of that makes them inherently evil. To illustrate what I mean, I want to share a thought experiment from Noam Chomsky, the famed scholar and author. In his book, Understanding Power, he poses a moral question. Imagine you see a child on a hot summer day, and he's holding an ice cream cone. A grown man pushes the child to the ground, steals the ice cream, and begins eating it as he walks away. How would you feel? What would you do? For most people, the answer is simple. You would probably feel disgusted by the man's actions, and you would probably buy the child a new ice cream cone, or at the very least comfort the poor kid, because most people don't do horrible things like this. The vast majority of us are not rotten at our core. People who act like this man are an exception, not the rule. Now, there's something important I do need to address, and that's the growing fear women have of men. I just said that most men are basically good, but for women, it can get a little bit harder to tell which ones are safe and which ones aren't. And when you look at powerful men in office or wealthy male billionaires with ties to things like Epstein's Island, it's easy to see why women might be fearful. There seems to be this growing association with women and death in our news media. These are men who have sexually assaulted, objectified, and violated women, and not just adult women, but underage girls on a grand scale. But because they're rich, famous, or politically influential, they don't face any consequences. People like Trump, Bill Clinton, and many others have been proven to have ties to the island. And even despite that, they're very seldom ever held accountable. And I think that sends a dangerous message. It says that we as a society don't take sexual abuse seriously. The fact that we've elected not one, but two men with clear histories of sexual misconduct and still allowed them to maintain power is just disgusting. It shows how little we value women's safety and dignity, but this isn't just a political issue. Stories like Amanda Todd, stories like Junko Furuta are a horrifying reminder of how unchecked power can be dangerous. In the specific case of Junko, if you haven't heard her story, I'm going to spare you the details, but do keep in mind it's graphic and it's deeply disturbing. She was a young woman who became the victim of brutal torture, assault, and murder by a group of young men with ties to the Yakuza. And despite the horrifying nature of the crime, these men did not face the death penalty. They actually barely served any time at all, and many of them walked free because of their connections. This, a lot like the Epstein case, is a disturbing and extreme example of how political and criminal complicity allow the worst kinds of abuse to go unchecked. Junko Furuta never hurt anyone. She did nothing wrong except exist as a woman. And with the Amanda Todd example, it is not as extreme, but it's kind of a byproduct of the same sort of problem. It took 10 years for the man who groomed her to be put to justice, and her suicide was kind of made fun of and mocked and became an internet meme for a really long time just because of the passive cruelty of most people online. I don't know. These extreme cases are probably not gonna happen to most of you. You're probably not gonna get taken to an island or abducted by criminals with mafia ties. There might be some people that are shitty to you online, but for the most part, you're probably not gonna get tortured or violated to the point of death. These things are horrific, yes, but they're also not guaranteed to happen to you. But the fear does not come from these extreme isolated cases. The fear comes from the lack of action when it comes to holding the ones responsible accountable when these isolated cases occur. The fear comes from knowing that these horrors do exist, and in many cases nothing was done to stop them. Society turns a blind eye. We pretend it doesn't happen even when it's right in front of us. For a lot of women, that's terrifying. Whether it's the news, television, film, or social media, there's this constant underlying connection between women, rape, and death. So yes, I get it. Women are terrified, and as a result, they don't trust men. Now, guys, if you're watching this, I want you to try something. Ask any woman in your life, whether it is a family member, a friend, a coworker, if they've ever been sexually harassed. You would probably be surprised to find that a lot of them will say yes. I do need to make one thing crystal clear, though. I reject the notion that men are trash. Yes, trash men do exist, but as I said earlier, I think most men, and by extension most people, are basically good. I wholeheartedly believe that, and I don't think it's naive to do so. So the idea that men are inherently trash, while often not meant literally, is still harmful, because language shapes how we think. When we call men trash, even if it's just part of a frustrated narrative, we feed into a toxic mindset that doesn't help anyone. Many progressive spaces justify hostility towards men, and in a lot of those spaces, I notice a concerning lack of empathy for men, and that's frustrating to me. I think it's one of the reasons why so many young men feel alienated by feminists and progressives. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing misogynistic behavior or justifying the dangerous rhetoric some young men indulge in. The last thing I want is for a bunch of obnoxious conservatives to latch themselves themselves onto my content because I disagreed with like a handful of feminists. I actually can't stand conservatives, especially with how much more unhinged they've gotten in the past few years, but that's a whole other can of worms, and this video's already a bit bloated. The point is that figures like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate offer something that very few progressives actually take the time to offer young boys, and that is a level of relatability and understanding, which is not a good thing because they don't actually have your best interests in mind. They're just corrupt scumbags. Andrew Tate is not offering wisdom, he's offering attention. He makes these boys feel seen, heard, and validated. Let's face it, for a sexually frustrated, lonely, socially awkward, and insecure teenage boy, who are they going to listen to? The feminist saying all men are trash, or the guy who promises he can help them become an alpha? It's manipulative, it's toxic, but it's also powerful to someone looking for guidance. I'm not saying it's women's responsibility to comfort men, but I am saying that the alienating language we've normalized in a lot of these quote-unquote woke spaces is not helping anyone. It doesn't help young girls either because it encourages resentment toward men, which only makes things worse. Teenage boys are ignorant, self-absorbed, and yes, vulnerable to propaganda. Yes, they should know better, but it's hard to blame them for feeling alienated, especially when everything around them seems to reinforce the idea that they are the problem for being born male. Every time we say things like men are trash, men are evil, or men deserve to be lonely, we only reinforce this narrative that feminists hate men. I get the fear. I really do. I know where it comes from, but I think in many cases it's been taken too far. That's why I cringe when I hear words like mansplaining or manspreading, because they're not even clever wordplay. You're just slapping man in front of something to make it sound worse. Being condescending is something anyone can do. Why does it need to be labeled as mansplaining? A shitty man being condescending to you doesn't need a special name, it's just bad behavior. The issue with these terms is that they give the wrong impression. They, take toxic masculinity, for example. As an adult, I understand that it's not saying all masculinity is toxic, but rather that it is a specific type of masculinity, the kind that involves aggressive dick wagging, competition, and domination. But when I first heard the term, back when I was a young little boy, I didn't get it. To me, it sounded like being masculine in general was the problem. I wonder if there are better ways to categorize these issues, terms that are more specific and less misleading. I just think it's an effect of the internet. These terms might have originally been used in feminist circles or academic classes in women's history, but on the internet everyone can see and comment on them, and when those terms are used in non-educational contexts, especially when they're thrown around in mainstream spaces, it leads to the larger narrative that feminists just hate men. It might seem like a small thing to focus on, but language shapes how we think. The quality of our ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language, or to quote George Carlin,
because we do think in language. And so the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. So maybe some of this patriarchal shit ought to go away. I think spokesman ought to be spokesperson. I think chairman ought to be chairperson. I think mankind ought to be humankind. But they take it too far. They take themselves too seriously. They exaggerate. They want me to call that thing in the street a person-hole cover. I think that's taking it a little bit too far. What would you call a ladies' man? A person's person? That would make a he-man an it person. Little kids would be afraid of the boogie person. They'd look up in the sky and see the person in the moon. Guys would say, come back here and fight like a person, and we'd all sing for It's a Jolly Good Person. That's the kind of thing you would hear on Late Night with David Letterperson.
Now, let me tell you a story. When I was a preteen, I was groomed by an adult woman. She seemed to develop feelings for me and would say a lot of inappropriate things when we talked. She would even talk about sucking my dick in great detail. Just in case you're curious, I was like 13. It didn't stop at flirting. There was this strange emotional attachment where she would talk about these fantasies about marrying me when I turned 18. So there was a seductive element to our messages, but there was also something more complex and emotional, and I'm going to say it in quotation marks, romantic attachment that went beyond just lust. I want to say I'm glad I never met her in person. I want to say I'm glad it never went beyond the inappropriate messages, but I can't deny that part of me still wonders what would have happened if I had gone through with it, and another part of me, a very shameful one, wishes I did. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that, but I think this experience highlights how warped our concept of grooming really is. We don't see women as a threat. Instead, they're often viewed as objects of gratification. So when an adult woman takes advantage of a young boy, it doesn't seem to get the same level of disgust or attention. But when the roles are reversed and it's a man taking advantage of a young girl, there's an understandable outrage. Why the double standard? Because when women do it, it's often dismissed as less harmful or just boys being boys. But when it's the other way around, the outrage is swift and justified because we can clearly see it is a scummy, perverted man taking advantage of an innocent little girl. But the truth is that both are bad, should not be normalized. It's a deeply ingrained bias that dehumanizes both men and women in different ways, and it's something we need to start addressing if we're ever going to get past these harmful narratives. There was another girl when I was an adult that I wasn't attracted to in any way, just not my type. It's the nicest way I can say it. But she really liked me, and she would not stop flirting with me, unprompted. I mean, she just kept making jokes about bouncing on it, or blowing me, or pegging me, and I started to get annoyed and really uncomfortable. I had repeatedly told her to stop, and she promised she would, only to continue doing it. Well, at a certain point, she randomly started defending pedophilia, even admitting that she might have had inappropriate interactions with minors, but never fully confessing to it. It's like she sort of did this like half confess, half leave it up in the air, refusing to elaborate. I don't know where this came from or why she did it, but obviously it wasn't gonna fly, so I blocked her. And then a few months after that, another girl ends up becoming my mutual on Twitter, when I had a Twitter. And she kind of reminds me of the last girl I cut off, but I have a lot of friends that basically form their entire personality off of Tumblr, so I didn't think about it too deeply until she started saying similar things to me, just like the other one, in the exact same way. And so I started to get suspicious. I look at her account and see that she has her Steam listed under the name of the creep that I blocked. Yeah, this was obviously the same fucking person, so I threatened to call the cops if she ever contacts me again, told her to leave me the hell alone, and I blocked her. My point here is that these two stories show that everyone is capable of ugliness, be them a man or a woman. It's not a gendered phenomenon, despite what the media might lead you to believe. Women have it harder, but that's not the fault of all men. It's the fault of men that are in power. It's the fault of political corruption. It's the fault of culpable women who do nothing to help their fellow women and are complicit in maintaining the status quo. Here's another story, though this one's not as extreme. I worked at Hot Topic for about 2 weeks. I was pretty desperate to get away from my job at Subway, where I was treated with constant disrespect, and I could go on about why I hated working there. It was a pretty miserable experience, but I'll just say this: don't work at Subway if you value your sanity. Don't work at any fast food job if you value your sanity, but especially not jobs like Subway, Qdoba, Chipotle, or like fucking Firehouse or whatever the fuck, because you have to actually like have prolonged conversations with your customers, and it's just fucking, oh my god. Anyway, I was desperate to leave, so I got a job at Hot Topic because I'm into anime and video games and nerd culture, and I've always had a soft spot for goth culture. I thought working there would help me connect with people who shared my interests, and I had also been a shift leader at Subway, so the manager at Hot Topic hired me as a manager too, which meant I'd at least get 25 hours a week. But when I started, I quickly realized I was not going to make many friends. I was the only guy working there. Everybody else was a little too young, and so I just didn't feel comfortable talking to them, and there was no chance I was going to become friends with my boss. There was one person who seemed like they could have been a potential friend. It was this gay guy, same age as me, who liked a lot of the same movies as me, and he was alright, but I wasn't there very long before I got fired. You see, when I was working there, I made it a point not to talk to anybody. I mean, I would speak when spoken to, but outside of this one guy and the manager, I really wouldn't talk to anybody. The situation wasn't ideal. They had expected me to learn everything about it in 4 days, which was a lot to take in, and for a company that asked for my pronouns during the interview and employed a lot of autistic people, they showed zero empathy for my social anxiety and ADHD, so it was a bit baffling that I got fired after 2 weeks of being there because of complaints from other coworkers saying that I made them uncomfortable. I don't know how that could have happened, especially since I went out of my way to avoid talking to anyone. Maybe the fact that I was quiet was what made them uncomfortable, but I never actually felt welcome since the first day I started. If I had crossed any boundaries, no one ever communicated them to me. I don't miss the job. They were offering 25 hours a week for like 10 an hour. Wouldn't have been enough to support myself anyway, but the whole experience highlights an important point that just because someone makes you uncomfortable does not mean they're dangerous or malicious. And I got back on my feet after that. I found a job at Walmart for 14 an hour. So, you know, I'm not gonna dwell on it, you know. And at Walmart, my coworkers were actually cool. They were nerds with a lot of the same taste that I have, and a lot of them still hang out with me even though I've quit working at Walmart. It was also nice to have coworkers that treat trans people like human beings, so that's also pretty awesome. It's clear to me that whatever caused people to complain about me at Hot Topic was very exclusive to that place and not really a reflection on me. It was strange because at the end of the day, it felt like I was being judged for being different. There's more nuance to this than I'm making it sound, and my situation was rare. That's probably never going to happen to you. There's more nuance to this than I'm making it sound, and my situation was rare. But I think it highlights the point I'm trying to make here. We think in language, and we need to be more mindful of how our words and actions affect those around us. I really don't want to sound like an incel, so I mean this in the most respectful way I can possibly muster. Hating men is not a personality. You might have heard of Chappell Roan, who, in my opinion, has sort of always been insufferable. Good music, though. Here's a quote that she graced us with about a year or two back. "I'm never dating a man again. I'm not attracted to them. I don't think they make good art." This quote is completely fine for the most part. You don't date men? That's totally okay. I genuinely don't care. You're a lesbian? That's fine. You're not attracted to them. Again, I get it. That's just your orientation. Couldn't be me, though. I love cock. No, but the part about not making good art, that is probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And what's more egregious is this post I found talking about it. Y'all are probably going to downvote me for this, but I do believe she meant that she doesn't think men create good art. Not that men never create good art or aren't capable of it, but if you look at society, men are structurally upheld as the creators of the most important art ever. Most of the people whose work you study in school from childhood to university level are men. It's notoriously difficult to break into academic fields as a woman because of the prejudice against women. Women's art is held to a much harsher standard than men. Women's art is pigeonholed and scrutinized in ways men's art isn't. As a result, a lot of the art that men make is, frankly, boring and uninspired. To be honest with you, I really don't like how this sub is now 99% just men and or cishet people begging to be coddled or babied. Oh my fucking god, shut the fuck up! It's not about begging to be coddled or babied as it is criticizing her for saying something stupid because what she said was stupid. She did not say the massive, honestly very dehumanizing and condescending paragraph of context you gave for what she said. She said something stupid. I am aware that women have a hard time reaching success when it comes to making art. Bands like Marmozets, Rollo Tomasi, Ginger, Dream State, Hop Along, OK Goodnight, and so on will probably never reach the success of bands like Paramore or In This Moment, and I know that because you haven't heard of them. You watching this, you don't know who these people are, and that upsets me. Listen to them. They're all very, very good. They may have their own personal fandoms, but if you bring them up in public spaces, people generally don't know who they are, or they compare them to more successful women that they literally don't share anything in common with. And considering In This Moment's image is inherently sexual, I mean, I think that sort of speaks for itself, which isn't to say that In This Moment's autonomy isn't powerful or meaningful or progressive in its own way. It's just a little more accurate to say that them being one of the only mainstream metal bands with a woman as the lead singer and having an overtly sexualized image is not a coincidence. But at the same time, it is not my responsibility to understand that you aren't literally saying that men don't make good art. It's actually your responsibility to not say dumb shit. At this point, it's not even about being coddled or whatever. It's just basic fucking accountability. I cannot stand people like this. They're so dishonest. And there's another part in the subreddit where someone makes a valid point, that Chapel Roan claiming men don't make good art is kind of silly because her entire aesthetic is borrowed from drag culture. Then someone had the fucking audacity to reply by saying that drag culture is more queer culture than it is male culture, which implies that queer men are not men. They are definitely still men. So it's still male culture. I know that's not literally what you meant, but it's like, it's the same thing. Think about what you're saying before you say it. I'm genuinely so tired of this corny bullshit that people do. It's like the discourse of bi women bringing their boyfriend to Pride. What are you gonna do if you're at Pride and a bisexual woman brings her boyfriend? Is your socially awkward ass gonna approach and say something? Really? No, because you're gonna look like a dick. We never once question it when a bisexual man ends up with a woman, but the second a bisexual woman ends up with a man, she's a traitor, and she's not actually a true bisexual and can't think for herself. You need to prove to me that you're gay. Make out with another woman in front of me immediately. Are we really fucking power scaling queerness now? Are we gonna treat being gay like it's a fucking power level in Dragon Ball Z? I can't count the number of times I've seen shitty posts about men being sexually abused, opening up about their abuse, being mocked by other men, and then these exact types of hateful, quote-unquote, progressive people start using that as an example for why men don't deserve sympathy. They'll say things like, you're the same ones trying to argue for male victims, but you can't even take male victims seriously, in an attempt to own the misogynists, but they're not! They're not the ones calling for male victims to be taken seriously, and even if they were, how is this observation helpful? You're just subtly implying that male victims don't deserve sympathy because shitty, trash, awful men exist. How the fuck is that fair in any way? Or every time I see a joke about male suicide rates, or Men's Mental Health Month being mocked by women completely unprompted, or how any woman in these progressive spaces that expresses basic empathy for men is labeled a pick-me. No. Okay? Blair White is a pick-me. Powder, the fucking VTuber that panders to right-wing extremists, is a pick-me. A woman offering empathy to men is a normal, empathetic human being. I think some of these people just need to go outside because it's clear their hatred for men leads them to spiral in really unhealthy ways. This cannot be a fun way to live. There's this one person on Twitter that was watching Monogatari and they live tweeted their reactions to the series, and at a certain point they made a joke about a straight male character being friends with an overtly lesbian character. What they said specifically was that straight men and lesbian women should be friends for their mutual attraction to women. Now, I get why some lesbians might find that comparison frustrating. It's understandable that a statement like this could feel reductive or dismissive of the complexities of lesbian attraction versus the general objectification of women in our culture. But for one, there are lesbians that objectify women, that is a thing. And two, I think the comment itself is harmless. I think it would be great if straight men and lesbians could have genuine friendship without it being weird. And I also believe that a lot of straight men could benefit from learning to be friends with women in general without making it weird. That idea in and of itself is not a harmful statement at all, and I have lesbian friendships that are healthy and meaningful, so it's possible. The real issue, though, came in the responses, which seemed more like people trying to one-up each other on who respects women more. Like, I guess we're just power scaling our respect for women, too. It's all fun and games till someone starts talking like Sephiroth. Lesbian or not, you sound like fedora-tipping Redditors. The backlash wasn't really about the original joke. It was about policing whose love for women counts more. And to me, that reaction is just petty. It's a classic case of taking something minor and turning it into this huge debate that just wasn't needed in the first place. Where does this come from? Well, I have to go back to that subreddit I spoke about earlier. The person I was quoting, who wrote that whole essay about Chapel Roan's dumb quote, has justified their shitty comments by saying men are not oppressed for being men. And I'm going to push back on that mentality because I think men are oppressed for being men. It's just not by women. It's by other men. It's the stupid expectations men put on each other that they can never win. It's the incessant need to belittle other men for being cucks or being gay or being perceived as weak and therefore lesser. We are oppressed by other men for not being man enough. But all of that blame is then directed towards women by way of social media and entertainment and news outlets as a way to obfuscate the problem. So nothing is done about it because young men fall for incel propaganda. I guess the question is, why am I spending so much energy on this? Most people don't think it's worth engaging with because in practice, women who hate men usually tend to avoid men, but men who hate women want something from them. But the way hostility towards men is discussed online can still be harmful, just in a less direct but still meaningful way. The concern isn't that criticism of men exists. I think we could afford to do better, but that broad, unchecked negativity can shape how younger boys interpret ideas like feminism or gender, and with more young men drifting towards more conservative spaces, it's worth asking about whether constant anger is actually helping anyone. I'm not talking about anger at misogyny or bigotry, I'm talking about anger at men. Instead of expecting teenagers to sort through all of this on their own, there's value in offering better guidance than what is made available. Some direction, rather than leaving them to figure it out through algorithm-driven outrage. That doesn't absolve them of personal responsibility, but I think a little positive influence could go a long way. Defining your entire online existence by your hatred for men isn't healthy. It can keep you stuck in cycles of anger rather than actually getting anywhere and learning to heal from your trauma. The point isn't to dismiss anyone's experiences or frustrations, but if the goal is progress, then constant hostility towards men isn't getting us there. It's a waste of your time and energy. It's bad for young men because it teaches them that feminists hate men, and it's bad for young women because it teaches them to look at men as a problem to avoid rather than face their traumas head on. I hope I've made it clear by this point, this video is not meant to dunk on women. In fact, I should even go on to say that hating women's not a personality either. I had this coworker at Subway who told me about how he broke up with his girlfriend because she dyed her hair blue. And the way he told the story, he said it like it was a reasonable, justified decision, with this tone like he expected me to agree with him. He spoke about it with so much confidence, as if he thought his reasoning made perfect sense. And what struck me was how blind he seemed to be about his own behavior. He genuinely didn't see that what he was describing wasn't about setting boundaries, it was about having control. He framed it as if his discomfort with her appearance was some sort of moral stance, but the reality was that he was making her decision to change her hair color about himself. He said he didn't want to be affiliated with people like that, which I can only assume means he didn't want to be associated with the stereotype of blue-haired SJWs. The way he talked about her, though, was deeply dehumanizing. It wasn't about how she wanted to express herself. It was about how he felt her appearance reflected on him, and the whole time he spoke, it was clear he didn't think he was doing anything wrong, as if his actions were justified by some higher moral standard, but that's not how boundaries work. Setting boundaries is about respecting yourself and not trying to control someone else's choices. What he was doing was manipulation, and what really struck me was how unaware he seemed to be of it. Surely I don't need to explain to you why that's a problem, right? I had a friend who was supposed to move into a house with me and two others. At first, it seemed like it could work, but as we spent more time together, we all started to find him kind of annoying. Every week, without fail, all he ever wanted to do was talk about how lonely he was, how badly he wanted a girlfriend, and how he went to the gym and he got himself swole just to find love. It got a little exhausting because that was literally the only thing he ever wanted to talk about. There was nothing else going on with him, no hobbies, no interests outside of the gym. He didn't draw, he didn't play games, nothing. Honestly, we all know why he was going to the gym. It wasn't for his health. It was just to get attention. He was also just annoying. He'd ask us for advice, like whether it was a good idea to date a married woman, and I don't think I need to explain why the answer is no. But he wouldn't ever listen to us. It felt like he wasn't interested in our opinions. He just wanted us to feed into his delusions. He never took our advice. It wasn't just one girl. It was a cycle. He would jump from woman to woman with no real understanding of what he wanted from any of them. But of course, he was framing himself to be in the right every single time. He wanted us to validate him on every stupid idea he had, and God, Jesus Christ. But there was one girl who stuck around, a goth girl that clearly liked him. She was definitely pretty, too. My type for sure. The problem was he wasn't into her for any of the reasons that would matter in a real relationship. He just liked the goth aesthetic, not because he valued the culture or liked the music, but because he thought it was hot, and the way he talked about her was just strange. He'd tell us how she got mad at him when he called something she liked gay, and then expect us to sympathize with him. He'd insult everything about her interests, from the music she listened to the cartoons and anime she liked, basically anything that defined her. And it was incredibly ironic coming from someone with no personality or interests of his own. He was judgmental, but worse than that, he was kind of empty and shallow. He had no real sense of self, defining himself entirely by how he appealed to women. The final straw came when we were looking for a house to move into. We were all ready to tour places, but he couldn't even show up for the tour. At that point, we realized he wasn't going to be a reliable roommate. How could we trust him to pay rent or do chores or be dependable for anything if he couldn't even make it to something as simple as a house tour? We all agreed that we had to cut ties with him, and to be honest, I wish we had done it sooner. He was boring, annoying, immature, judgmental, and unreliable. I think that gets to the core of what a lot of incels believe. They're lonely, and that loneliness is completely valid, but it's the way that they respond to it. Men have this idea in their head that our value is entirely dependent on the validation that women give us, and that's not healthy. Then we have my dad. I love my dad. I've got a great relationship with him. Of course, I am the result of him being unfaithful. He's always had this weird habit of lying to me, and it was very clear that he was lying because he would say something different about the same events depending on what narrative he wanted to push. As an example, my older brother watched his best friend accidentally blow his brains out. His friend was playing with a gun, he didn't realize it was loaded, and the safety was off, and he jokingly shot himself in the head only to end up dying. And my brother was deeply scarred by this event, and my dad has told me that story multiple times. Now, if he's trying to talk about how guns are dangerous, he will tell the story exactly as it happened. But if he's trying to talk about how metal music is demonic and warps people into doing bad things, he will simply mention that my brother's best friend was into heavy metal music and he shot himself in the head, as if implying that there was a correlation there. In one breath, he frames it as a dangerous irresponsibility, and in another, he frames it as metal music making people depressed. So with my dad's general irresponsibility and inability to remain consistent with the details, sometimes it made being in public with him very unbearable, because he had this camera, and he used to like it a lot. He took pictures of everything he did and always posted it on Facebook. He would also take pictures of people, like myself or my mom, without their consent. I mean, he was waving the thing around constantly. Now, I need to clarify, my dad is not a bad person. But he is a little stupid, because he would take pictures of everything he found appealing, or cute, or funny, and this would sometimes be other pets, which is pretty harmless, but sometimes he would take pictures of people's children. And I don't think I need to explain to you why it's a weird fucking thing to do. And every time he did it with me present, I would scold him and tell him to stop, but I don't think he understood why it was a weird thing to do and why it made me uncomfortable when he did it. Again, I reiterate, my dad is not a pervert. He's not a sicko or a predator. He's inconsiderate of others, and he's obsessed with his camera. But having to explain to him that it isn't appropriate to take pictures of other people's children in public was really awkward and really frustrating for me, because he would keep doing it every time I told him to stop, and then eventually it backfired. One time he did it at the grocery store, the father caught him and told him to delete it, and as he recounted this embarrassing story to me, he spoke again with that same confidence in himself that those other men had. That lack of accountability, framing himself as in the right when he was so obviously in the wrong. He did stop after that, but you get the point. He's not like the other scummy men that obviously don't respect women, because at worst he's really only guilty of being ignorant. But that ignorance is still harmful, and his inability to own up to his actions and understand that they're not okay comes from him never having to face accountability in the past. And that's one of the many things that many shitty men struggle with: accountability for their actions. You see, my father was not misogynistic on purpose. He wasn't malicious on purpose, but considering I was born from infidelity, it is pretty clear he doesn't respect women. He has a very authoritarian way of approaching his relationships, my way or the highway. And it should also be noted that he did indeed tell my mother that he would divorce her if she ever got fat, only to end up getting fat himself. I love my dad, but I also acknowledge that he's capable of being misogynistic, whether he intends to be or not. He voted for Kamala. He hates Donald Trump. He acknowledges the struggles of women, but he, as a man, has still indulged in behaviors that are misogynistic, and he doesn't even realize that about himself. What all these stories share in common is that these men don't think about themselves. They think they have the right to judge women, but never explore themselves in any meaningful way because they don't think they have to. But there is a stark difference between confidence and arrogance, which is exactly why incels end up the way they do. The loneliness they feel, the isolation, the sense of being unwanted, these are real painful experiences. I relate to those feelings. I understand wanting connection but not knowing how to find it, but that does not make their response to it acceptable. Women are not responsible for the fact that you feel unseen or unvalued. It might give you the sense of control to have something to blame, but it never resolves the deeper issues beneath all of that. It just makes you feel more miserable. It's not healthy to operate that way, and it only reinforces the judgment people have for socially awkward men. You feel anger at your situation, and that's okay. You have every right to be upset, but blaming women is not the solution. It will only make things worse. I remember I saw this post that talked about the male loneliness epidemic, and it reduced it to men being sad they aren't getting laid, and then it just tried to brush that off as a non-issue, even going so far as to say the not getting laid part was a skill issue. Okay, look, I agree that sex should not be your goal. You know, it's like an added bonus. I've had hookups before with strangers, and it's nothing to me. It feels meaningless, and they were very empty, and I came away from them feeling very gross and ugly, and nothing towards that person. It felt like nothing. Hookups are fine, but they're not going to make you feel whole. I think feeling ugly and feeling unwanted because you have a hard time finding sexual or romantic partners is a very normal and a totally valid thing to feel sad about. I hate this post because it just reinforces the idea that men are defined by their body count, but it's okay to be a virgin. It's okay to be single and lonely and inexperienced. I think a lot of men rush to find a girlfriend or try to get laid because they think they're a loser if they don't, and we gotta stop normalizing the idea that being a single, inexperienced man is a bad thing. It's totally fine. It's not something to be ashamed of. You know, calling it a skill issue is just immature and reductive and just genuinely stupid. Incels have this habit of projecting their frustrations onto women. They judge women for things that are in reality inconsequential to their worth, and it's always small stupid shit like enjoying anime or emo subcultures, being heavier or more masculine, having tattoos or piercings, being promiscuous, or even just having a lot of male friends. Every choice or expression of individuality becomes, in their eyes, a threat. And that logic is not rational, it's purely a defense mechanism. When these types of men feel powerless, shameful, or lonely, the easiest method to avoid confronting those emotions is to pin the blame on someone else. So naturally, women become the target for all that discomfort. If a man has been taught by society to measure his value primarily through the lens of sexual success, any perceived deviation from what is considered traditional is treated as a threat. It's not about the woman herself, it's about pure insecurity and projection. These judgments are arbitrary and meaningless, not to mention boring. A woman enjoying anime, having piercings, wearing goth clothes actually makes her very cool and awesome sauce, and if you think it's cringe, I hate you, and you're stupid and annoying. The men who despise women for harmless personal choices are themselves often empty, bland, and devoid of personality. They hate women who know who they are because they themselves refuse to look inward in any meaningful way. It's not just the grifters either. Sometimes it's more subtle, especially in progressive or so-called feminist spaces where people think that just because they talk about equality and claim they're not like the others, that they're somehow not a misogynist. I'm sorry, but just because you claim to be woke doesn't mean you're above having some deep-rooted biases against women. This isn't just a small issue, it's a pattern I've seen crop up over multiple years, and what makes it worse is that it often gets dressed up as a form of moral superiority. Some of these so-called quote-unquote progressive men will look for any excuse to act like grifters, hiding behind politically correct language to make themselves look good. There was like a period where Abigail Shapiro became a bit of a meme, and men began to make sexual comments about her. Abigail Shapiro, for those who don't know, is the sister to Ben Shapiro, and yeah, people were making jokes about her mommy milkers and gross, inappropriate sexual jokes at her expense, basically demeaning her. And look, I don't like her. I genuinely think she is as much of an insufferable piece of shit as her brother. But her being a piece of shit does not suddenly make it okay to objectify and talk down to her like she's a piece of meat. And that sets a dangerous precedent, because you're operating under the idea that women's sexual safety or dignity is something they earn by agreeing with you. You guys are fucking awful, and you should know better. This isn't limited to just one group. It's the same mentality behind those jokes that some people make about white women hiding behind the excuse of punching up because they're talking about white women. You guys are just being ridiculous. I think one of the worst parts of the gender divide is that trans people often get caught in the middle. They're dismissed by some self-described progressives who see them as a threat to their understanding of womanhood. TERFs like J.K. Rowling define womanhood in ways that exclude trans women, and this often stems from how misogyny has shaped her own experiences. But instead of choosing to use those experiences as a way to build empathy, she channels them into exclusion and hostility towards people that she doesn't fully understand. And a lot of the TERFs that believe the same thing she does are the exact same way. At the same time, trans people face hatred from cis men who are insecure about their sexuality or uncomfortable with attraction to trans women, as well as from people who see anything outside traditional gender norms as unnatural or worthy of disgust. They already hate women, so of course they're going to hate what they perceive as a man pretending to be a woman, because why would you willingly want to be a woman? The result is that trans women are treated as a violation of what women are supposed to be. TERFs and transphobic grifters may hold their bigoted beliefs for different reasons, but it kind of relies on the same rigid ideas about gender. Instead of looking inward, they externalize that discomfort onto trans people who have done the work of figuring themselves out. I think the point is pretty clear. You can be a piece of shit no matter what you're born as. And judging an entire group of people is just a waste of time, because it's always going to be way more complex than that. Doesn't matter how justified you think you are. Hating an entire gender is not healthy, plain and fucking simple. That being said, I get the sentiment. I understand that our culture's social laziness has led a lot of people to believe that simple things like empathy are dead. I understand that a lot of the women that hate men are traumatized and just not coping with it in a healthy way, and I understand that a lot of the men that hate women are traumatized and just not coping with it in a healthy way. But I also understand exactly why women fear men so much, and in order to help you see where they're coming from, I want to talk about prison. Prison is notoriously awful for men. The general fear of being sexually abused skyrockets, but rather than actually having empathy for victims, cops think you deserve it, and other inmates think you're a punk, which means that you're weak. You're just a bitch. Victim blaming is normalized in prisons, and there is zero empathy for victims of sexual abuse. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is that this is an environment where women are removed from the equation. It sheds spotlight into how some men can be very cruel to each other. They can do very awful, terrifying things to each other, and no one bats an eye. I think that with that in mind, we can understand precisely why women fear men, because we fear men when put in a situation where we're surrounded by them and they have nothing left to lose. Shit, I would argue it's actually worse for men in prison than it is for women in everyday life, because it's a place where the rapists are allowed to just be out in the open with their ugliness instead of trying to do it in more subtle ways like they typically are. But that's not really the point. I feel like that obfuscates the point, if anything. It's, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's not a competition. It's not oppression Olympics here. The point is just that a lot of these kinds of men make it very clear how they view women because of the way that they treat other men when they're no longer given access to women. So do you not see the problem with this? Why is it that people don't question the rapist for his shitty actions, but they judge the victim for being weak enough to allow himself to be violated? It's clear the police don't care because they think criminals deserve it, and even if they didn't, in their eyes, it's not worth risking their lives. But what's extremely concerning to me is just how normalized it is, to the point you've got shows like fucking SpongeBob cracking jokes about it.
It's treasure! Look, doubloons! Don't drop them.
I'm not here to finger wag. You know, I loved the Booty Warrior episode from Boondocks. It's one of the funniest fucking episodes. You know, that's not my point. I'm not here to clutch pearls. I do think you can joke about anything while also feeling like it's a bit disturbing that people don't really seem to care all that much. At least not enough to do anything about it. This is more on police officers that let this shit happen and the criminals who engage in it than it is men as a whole. But I'm using this example because it's like the only way that I can get men to understand why women are afraid. There's this quote from Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana, that I think about sometimes, but it's not because I agree with it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's in similar fashion to the Chappell Roan thing. It's just a very dumb and telling statement. Rape is one of the most terrible crimes on earth, and it happens every few minutes. The problem with groups who deal with rape is that they try to educate women about how to defend themselves. What really needs to be done is teaching men not to rape. Go to the source and start there. Now, I agree, it's not fair to teach women how to defend themselves because we shouldn't live in a world where they even have to. But this cuts to the core of what I'm talking about because he's talking like men have to be taught not to rape. It implies that we have like a natural male instinct to rape. Like we're animals and we need behavioral training. And that's just not true, okay? Like I'm aware that's not literally what he's saying, but it's the same idea. It's the way he says it. And again, it's not on me to understand your intentions. It's on you to choose your words better because we think in language. As I had established earlier, I think most people are basically good. People don't rape because they weren't taught not to. They know it's wrong. On average, most normal men you meet are not suppressing some violent urge to hurt women. You know, the men who rape are absolutely aware that their actions are immoral. They just don't give a fuck. I think there are a lot of reasons why men are feeling so lonely. And I've laid a bunch of them out. But if I were to get at the core of it, I think it's that we don't have any meaningful support systems. Women have them for each other because platonic affection between a woman and another woman is generally normalized. But men struggle to emotionally support each other because for a lot of us it feels awkward. So what we're left with is a unique problem. We don't feel like we can confide in each other because we're taught to put up a wall, but we can't confide in women because they're afraid of us. So the result is pure emotional isolation. And I think for a lot of men, it gets a little bit exhausting. Now, I do want to say this. I do think men are slowly starting to pull back on this, and I do think part of it is because of how distant women have been. At every job I've worked, every friend group I've been a part of, both online and in person, I notice that purely straight men will make gay jokes about their friends. And sometimes these jokes do veer into dangerously rapey territory if your humor has a bit of a dark side, but it is becoming clear that a lot of men are getting more comfortable with their sexuality. It is entirely through a lens of irony, but it also displays a comfort in one's own masculinity. It's a lot more common now than I think it ever was back in the day. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that all the problems are solved and everything's all peachy cream. It's obviously not, but it's something. It might be small, but it's a sign of progress. It's okay to be inexperienced. It's okay to crave affection and love and intimacy, and it's okay to feel sad that you don't have access to it. I feel that way constantly. I've been in relationships before, but most of them have been online, as pathetic as that makes me feel. But I can comfortably admit it because I know it's not anything to do with me. I want to be loved. I desperately want connection, and every day actually feels more hopeless than the last. It aches at times, and every time I see a happy couple or a meme that I wish I could share with somebody or some cheesy romantic scene in fictional media, I grow more and more depressed by the hour. My thoughts are not charitable, and as time has gone on, every single attempt to find that connection has only resulted in me hating myself more and more. You would think it's something I'd get used to, but the truth is the more I get rejected, the more I feel scared that I actually am going to die alone, that I'm not good enough for anyone. And I'm tired of feeling that way. I want to remove the part of my brain that gives a fuck. It's hypocritical of me to say this, but even so, I do still think it's something that needs to be said and something I wish I was told when I was younger. A woman's not going to fix you. A lot of people push back on that, saying that their current relationship fixed their depression. But what this means is that you are either relying too much on another person and your relationship is not going to last, or you did get better, coincidentally, right when you got into a relationship. The long and short of it is that the relationship itself did not fix you. You fixed you. Love lifts you up, and a healthy relationship can change your life for the better, but that's not going to replace your self-worth. That's something you find for yourself. I was in an online relationship with someone from when I was 12, clear through to the age of 19. When it started, we were both naive kids in very difficult living situations. She had an abusive, alcoholic mother, and I was with my parents. But my home life was chaotic because we always had family staying with us, and I was sheltered, and I was never allowed to hang out with friends from school or leave the house or so much as have a lock on my door. And when I say my home life was chaotic, what I mean is that the first time I ever saw a cop was from my dad calling the police during a dispute with our guests, and the cop arresting their 16-year-old daughter because she gave him a little bit of attitude. I was always socially awkward in school and never made that many friends, so this online relationship was the first time that a girl gave me any sort of validation, and I was head over heels. I mean, I was obsessed with her. I would save and cherish every picture of her she sent me. I would swoon during calls at the sound of her voice. I would feel depressed to the point of not eating if she went longer than a day not messaging me. But when she did message me, I'd be so overjoyed I could just die. I looked at her as my escape. I fantasized about moving out, becoming rich and famous, and spoiling her. But of course, naive preteen pipe dream. Things changed when she was assaulted. I was staying in Florida for 2 weeks with my sister. My sister had a tumor, and she didn't have much longer left to live. Her husband was abusive, though we didn't know that at the time. We just knew something about him wasn't all there, but we chalked it up to him being an asshole. We never knew he was hurting her or her kids until it was already too late. We had to remodel her house with no plan, and her husband was genuinely incompetent, doing things out of order, like placing the cabinets in the kitchen first before placing the tile, or trying to fix the wiring himself and nearly getting himself killed. To say the least, I was miserable. But things got even worse when I was asleep and my girlfriend was assaulted. She called me multiple times, begging me to wake up, but by the time I came to, it already happened. The guilt hit me hard. I recall my mom was watching Law & Order Special Victims Unit and begging her to turn it off because they just kept saying rape over and over. My girlfriend was abused, and I couldn't do shit to help her. I will forever remember that being the worst 2 weeks of not only my life, but hers as well. I'm sure it's still the worst period of her life to this day. Of course, she forgave me for not being awake when she needed me. I tried to support her, but what happened to her changed pretty much everything. She began drinking and messaging me less. She started to become more angry at me over the smallest things, and I stayed with her both because of the guilt and because I didn't want to leave her while she was dealing with this. I didn't want to abandon her. It wasn't about me. She was the one that was hurting, so I just had to suck it up and be there for her. But as time went on, she just grew more and more distant, and it seemed like no matter what I do, things would just get worse and worse. She wouldn't talk to me. She ghosted me for long periods of time. She brushed me off on days she promised we'd spend hanging out, like my birthday or Valentine's Day. She would start arguments with me, never accepting my help when I offered to come by or offered her money or anything. But then when I couldn't help, she got angry and told me all I ever do is say sorry. Again, it's not about me. I know that. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I wasn't equipped at the time to deal with that. It felt like everything I did only made things worse. But I also know that she wasn't really being mean to me because she wanted to be. She was hurting, and I couldn't help her in any way that she needed, and that was frustrating for her. So not knowing how to deal with it in a healthy way, she would lash out. The breaking point came when she and I were set to meet. I came all the way to Texas for her. I spent money on an expensive hotel. My heart was beating rapidly. Things had been rough, but I can finally meet her. I can be close to her. I can finally give her even a fraction of the support she needs. I can finally make up for not being there when she needed me. But when I arrived, she didn't show up. I waited in that hotel for hours, and I slowly began to break apart as I came to the horrifying realization that she might have just ghosted me again. I called my dad through tears, telling him how badly I screwed up, and luckily he wasn't angry at me. He was impressed. As far as he knew, I was socially anxious, and I never took risks. He was shocked to see me out of my bubble, and he didn't scold me. He just drove me home. I guess the heartbreak was punishment enough. Of course, there wasn't anything I could have done beyond what I already did. With it being a long distance relationship, my resources were kind of limited. I tried my best with what I had, and I don't think she resents me for that. It's hard to say I should have left for my own sake because that wouldn't have been a great decision. It would have been abandoning her when she needed someone, but I also wonder if maybe that would have been the best thing I could have done for her, because it was clear to me that my presence really only made things worse for her. I get why I stayed, just as much as I get why we were never going to work out. I don't know quite when things had officially ended, but I do know that I let it go on for far longer than I ever should have because I didn't want to give up on her. I didn't want to give up on us. If you have to know, by the way, I spoke to her again like 3 years ago, so I only have that to go off of. But as far as I know, she's doing okay. I can't speak on whether she's gone to therapy, but she's become a lot happier since then, and is in a much more healthy relationship as far as I can tell. Last I spoke to her, she seemed to be doing financially well. She seemed a lot more upbeat and positive. And after she and I split, I've had many situationships and awkward flirty interactions with many people online. But a good amount of it has been online because I've never been given the ability to form real life connections. And almost all of them were my feeble attempts to fill the void left behind by her instead of trying to heal, trying to let myself let go. 2018 to 2019 were the worst years of my life for all of this. But when I think back on them, in a weird way, I'm kind of thankful that they happened. Not thankful that she was assaulted, of course not. Not thankful that my sister died, but thankful that I learned to endure, because it taught me a lot about myself and what I want out of my life. My sister was a strong woman. When I think back on those 2 weeks I spent there, the highlight wasn't the 2 days my dad took me to Disneyland. It was the walks I had with my sister amidst all of the chaos in that home. It was nice to take a walk with my sister and just breathe. And I remember talking to this woman who was dying of a tumor in her brain, but who had so much life left to live with 3 kids that she will never be able to watch grow up, and a family that loves her. And in that moment, I realized all I was ever doing, all I could ever think about was ending my own life. But this person had so much robbed from her that she was never going to be able to live her life. So when my sister passed away, I made a vow to myself, a vow to live, if not for myself, for others, because ending my life won't fix things. I didn't learn my lesson for a long time after that. As I said, I was lonely. I kept looking for sexual validation to feel better about myself, and it turned what could have been normal, healthy friendships into something very shallow and empty. There's at least 20 people out there, I'm sure, that know more about me than they should and that I ruined things with. But there was one person who made me feel pretty happy. She was a trans girl I'd met online, and we fell into something easy. We were exchanging nudes, flirting, talking regularly. She validated me at a time when I felt that I really needed it, and I latched onto that. The thing was, she was upfront about her limits. She was physically attracted to me, but I wasn't her type romantically. She couldn't give me what I actually wanted, but I don't think I even knew what I actually wanted. I told myself I was okay with that. I figured if I could just be physically close to someone, even without commitment, it would be enough. I'd feel less pathetic, less like someone no one wanted. So I drove 3 hours to meet her. It was on impulse. I never booked a hotel. I still went through with it because I felt like I needed it. I felt like if I didn't do this, she would find someone else and she would move on. Even though it was poorly timed, it wasn't planned out at all, and ended up being one of my biggest regrets. I was so nervous. I didn't sleep the night before, and almost immediately when I got there, something went wrong. You see, she had a serious car accident when she was a kid. She had to have metal braces in her back that I can probably say affect her to this very day, and it has remained her most traumatizing experience her entire life. As I drove her around town, I drifted in and out of sleep, and then I had a near miss while I was driving, and the next thing I knew, she froze completely, and I didn't know what to do. I was scared and out of my depth in a place I wasn't familiar with someone I barely knew, and after about an hour, she came to it, but of course the trip ended early, and I drove home feeling worse than I ever had in my entire life. My parents thought I was at work. I didn't tell them anything. I just sat with it. I blamed myself pretty heavily. I kept asking why everything I got involved in seemed to go sideways. She kept talking to me after that, which I didn't expect, but something changed in how she treated me. If I got into an argument with a mutual friend, she took their side without hearing me out, even if she had no idea what we were even talking about. She'd put me down in group settings, and I stayed. Partly because she still showed physical interest in me, and I hadn't let go of the hope, and partly because I genuinely felt guilty, and I thought that I owed it to her not to leave. In fact, anytime I got frustrated with her regarding anything, she would guilt trip me, accusing me of abandoning her, and I took it, because I did hurt her. So maybe I deserved to be hurt. That wasn't a good reason to stay. It just meant that I stuck around long enough to feel gradually worse about myself and make things worse for her. We met later on down the road. We kissed, we cuddled. I thought maybe something had shifted. We never actually ended up having sex, just because it just didn't really feel right. When I opened up about how attached I had gotten, she seemed kind of caught off guard, like she hadn't seen it that way. And after that, things were awkward. And she'd sometimes talk about it like the awkwardness was my fault. Maybe it was. I'm not entirely sure where I end and she begins, but what I do know is that I should have ended the friendship the day I hurt her. It wasn't healthy for either of us to keep it going the way we did, and once I accepted that, I cut ties. She hasn't reached out since. I've tried to see how she's doing a couple times, but she never really responded, and to be honest, I'm kind of glad she didn't, because there is a part of me that kind of hates her, even though I know that I was not perfect and that a lot of it was my own doing. There's some bitterness in it for me, but I understand it. I was treating her like a solution to problems she had nothing to do with. I made my loneliness her responsibility. I relied on her for my own self-esteem, my need to feel wanted. She had her own stuff going on. She wasn't going to fix any of that, and staying in it as long as I did just meant it ended a lot worse than it needed to. Conveniently, not that long after I cut ties, and while I was still between situationships, I met someone new. This was a non-binary person I met through the My Chemical Romance Discord server, who, again, I am not going to name by name, but I met them through Discord, we'll just say that. As was typical of my behavior during that time, I sensed that it was another potential person for me to date that I had hoped would fill the void left behind by my first ex. And as we began talking, they started to grow attached to me, but as a result, tried to push me away. I insisted that we kept talking, and I think that was honestly the greatest decision of my life, but I do have to admit that I was still previously damaged by my last relationship. I had severe trust issues, and I didn't want to commit. I think it was terrifying for me because when I spoke to this person, they gave a lot of love and support. They would reassure me on things. If I got mad, they would understand why I'm angry in ways that even I couldn't understand. Whenever I got angry, I always assumed I was being unreasonable. I've never had anyone see where I'm coming from when I'm being irrational or erratic. They would get upset with me, but they would never insult me or blame me for anything. And the more we spoke, the more I started to love them. I was terrified because I didn't trust it. All I knew was that if I fell in love, I would get hurt. But I couldn't stop speaking to this person because doing so made me happy. I felt understood in a way that I had never felt with anyone. They had their frustrations with me, but they never gave up on me. Sometimes it would even be to a fault, and I think they realized that as we grew older. They explained their needs to me, and over time I learned to accommodate them a lot better. And in return, they helped me understand my own needs and gave me reassurance. I felt safe with this person, and that safety was scary, but I was also used to disappointment. By this point, I knew everyone I grew involved with would eventually drift away. And they knew that fear. They were familiar with it because they too had their heart broken. So when it came time for us to meet, I pretty much didn't expect anything. It's different from the various times I've tried to meet online friends or partners that I had romantic or sexual history with. Each time I would try to visit someone online expecting to be intimate, I would be ghosted, something would go wrong, and I'd have to go home early, or it just would not pan out that way, but would overall be a positive experience where I meet a friend and I hang out with them. But this was the one time where I didn't expect anything at all. I didn't even think it was going to happen. And then we ended up being intimate multiple times. And to this day, those were the best 2 weeks of my entire life. I think the reason I loved them so much was because when I was with them, I never once felt afraid that they would leave or cheat on me. I trusted them and they trusted me. I never felt judged or like I wasn't enough. I was enough simply by existing, and getting to meet them and realize that this was real made me feel comfortable. That's the strange part. You compare this to the previous relationship I had, and the feelings weren't as intense. With my first partner, it was a constant fluctuation between feeling miserable beyond belief and feeling elated and excited in a way I've never felt before. But with this person, it didn't feel that way. It felt normal and steady. And it wasn't as exciting or intense, but it also wasn't painful. It was just right. And I think that's something that I'll never forget about. But of course, all good things have to come to an end. After the second time we met, I came to the realization that I couldn't do this anymore. The distance was really starting to hurt. It took 2 years to finally meet, and then another 2 years to meet again. So when they had to go home, I felt empty, and I realized I could not bear that pain of having to let them go every 2 years. We're really only going to see each other every 2 years? I'm going to have to deal with this feeling every 2 years? Is that really what I want? So, I grew distant. I stopped talking to them as much, and after about a week of them getting worried about me, I broke up with them. They understood. They weren't happy about it, but they knew it needed to be done, and after about 3 months of not talking, we reconnected and stayed friends for another 2 years. But it was the end of last year where things began to get a little complicated. During the 2 years that we weren't dating, I had tried to find a new partner on at least 4 separate occasions, and I'm not going to share those instances because, again, this video is long as shit. But the general gist boiled down to me starting to develop feelings for a coworker or real-life friend, slowly getting closer to them, hanging out with them more, but struggling to get any clear answers from them because of how vague they were and how they generally sucked at messaging back. And then something would happen that would end our friendship, whether it's them finding a partner, them getting fired, or them being put on a different shift. If it had only happened one time, it probably wouldn't hurt so bad, but it was the fact that it kept happening over and over again. Each time my confidence would dwindle just a little bit more because I would never actually get to the stage where I could form a genuine connection with these people. It was always a will they, won't they. It was always me feeling deeply uncertain on how they view me, if they even give a shit about me in the first place, and then it would fizzle out before I could ever get anywhere. It wasn't that I didn't even ask them out. I would ask, get a yes, and then it still wouldn't really happen because they'd be too busy. The common theme is that all of them were not great at messaging back, but I think what hurt about it the most was the fact that each of these 4 instances was even less certain and lasted even shorter than the last. I know logically that has nothing to do with me. Some of them really were busy, some of them were emotionally unavailable, but each and every time running into that same brick wall over and over again started to get exhausting, so I took a break and decided that I didn't need to date for a while. And of course, that is the exact moment when my ex started to date again. I wasn't fully happy about it, but obviously it wasn't about me, and I tried to tell myself that I don't have any lingering feelings. This is just my friend that I used to date. I was a bit envious that they were securing dates and I couldn't. There's no way I possibly could have still loved my ex, right? I'm just going to stick around. I'm going to support them as a friend. I'm not going to give the details, but what I will say is that after 2 difficult situations that they had to go through, that I was there and trying to remain supportive for, the third guy ended up being the one. I mean, he was basically just me, but like lived in the same town as them or same state or whatever. And so they began to date. And when that happened, I had to cut ties. I stuck around for a while just to make sure that they were okay, but eventually it became a little clear they didn't need me. So for a brief period, we parted ways with the intention of becoming platonic friends once I can get my shit together. I stood by that decision because I couldn't keep doing it to myself, but what I had realized in that moment was something I couldn't avoid, and that was that I did still love them, and now they were with someone else. And I don't regret stepping away. You know, I did it for my own sake, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't leave me, honestly, the most miserable I think I've ever been in my entire life. It's pretty easy to move on from someone who treated you badly. My first ex hurt me deeply, even though I know that it was just their trauma. when the time came to meet in person, they couldn't even show up. I hated them for that for a really long time, but that hatred faded, and I forgave them. Once I healed, I stepped back, I looked at it more objectively, and my hatred went away, and so did my love for them. I feel nothing. I don't think about her. She never really crosses my mind anymore. I haven't forgotten, but I don't let it dictate my life anymore. Moving on was easier because all that remained were the negatives. But this time, it's a little bit different. How the fuck are you supposed to move on from someone who felt perfect for you in every way? How am I supposed to believe that I'm ever going to find something like that again? If I'm being honest, I've given up hope. And I'd also be lying if I said I'm not pretty fucking pissed about it. Because why do they get to find happiness and I don't? Am I not good enough? Do I not deserve it? What hurts the most is that I loved them because I never felt afraid they would leave me or end up with someone else. And now they're gone. And they're with someone else. And it's my fault. I know my anger isn't rational. I know it wasn't easy for them either. And I'm not angry at them. But none of that changes how I feel now. It's like something in me shut down. Like my heart just closed off and will never open up again. I want what I had. But in real life, not online. Except now I feel so far removed from the dating world that it barely even feels possible anymore, and that terrifies me. It pisses me off. It makes me angry at myself, at the people who hurt me, at my parents for never letting me have friends growing up, even at God for making it feel like some kind of cruel joke. I'm exhausted, and I'm so tired of feeling like this every single fucking day. I want to be loved. I want it so badly that I think about it every single fucking second. Sometimes I pray to God or whatever might be out there for some kind of sign, and I get nothing. I get silence. It feels like I'm losing my mind. I mean, am I just fucking crazy? Is there something wrong with me? I feel gaslit by reality itself. I feel like I'm trapped in an endless feedback loop with no end in sight. It seems so easy for everyone else. Everywhere I look, there are happy couples. So when does it get to be my turn? How long am I supposed to wait? I'm not asking for much. Did I do something wrong? Is this some kind of purgatory? Is it a curse? If it was never meant to happen for me, why does it have to matter so much? Sometimes I wish I could just fucking lobotomize myself and just cut that fucking part of my brain out. I wish I could be content with what I have. I wish I could stay positive, but I can't. The one thing I want most feels impossibly far away, and I can't accept a reality where I never find my special person, but every time I try, every time I search, it just hurts more and more. Over and over again, I'm treated like my feelings don't matter, like I'm insignificant or just an afterthought, and the more I wish things were different, the more pathetic I feel, the more humiliated I feel. I don't know what to do anymore. I just want to love again. So I keep wondering the same thing over and over. When does this nightmare end? How am I supposed to believe? How am I supposed to keep going? Why aren't my platonic friendships and family relationships enough for me? Why can't I just be content with what I've got? These feelings are commonplace for me at this point, and I'll be honest, I don't really have a clear answer. Even now, I still don't. But I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. These thoughts are easy to default back onto, but they aren't helpful. They only serve to make me feel worse about myself, and yet they're so powerful and so intense, it's impossible not to spiral for me. The sad truth of the matter is, I will probably feel like this for a long time. Even if I do find a partner, that self-doubt isn't going to go away anytime soon. I'm still going to feel lonely, because loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about a sense of belonging. If you don't feel like you belong anywhere, it's easy to wallow in your own misery. So this is the part of the video where I'm going to tell you to love yourself. But don't cringe. Hear me out for a second. I get it. Hearing that all the time is fucking annoying. People tell you to love yourself like it's easy, but they never explain why it's important to love yourself, nor do they explain how to love yourself. So when you're already feeling lonely or insecure, hearing that advice is a little bit dismissive. Like someone handing you a puzzle with like half the pieces missing. Like they just threw it in the trash before they even handed it to you. Plus, I already do love myself despite my rant earlier, and I'll be honest, it's not going to magically get rid of your uncertainty or anxiety about not finding love, but it does prepare you for when love finally decides to rear its ugly head towards you and give you a shot. The reason self-love matters has very little to do with ego, and it has everything to do with balance. If you don't love yourself even just a little bit, then every relationship you enter becomes unstable because you're asking the other person to carry the entire weight of your self-worth. You need constant reassurance, constant validation, and constant reminders that you're good enough, and it will never be enough because you're never going to believe it. That can be exhausting for your partner, and it's very exhausting for you. But when you actually do develop some level of respect for yourself, even if it's just a tiny bit, you're going to notice something changes. You're not relying on others to do all of the loving for you. That takes pressure off of them, and strangely enough, it takes pressure off of you. You don't have to constantly chase reassurance. You don't have to analyze every little interaction for signs that they secretly don't care. Instead, you can actually focus on giving love as much as you receive it, and that's what healthy relationships are meant to look like. But this is where people get confused, because self-love does not mean that you like yourself all the time. It doesn't mean pretending you're perfect. It doesn't mean ignoring your flaws, and it definitely isn't narcissism. In fact, I would actually argue that narcissists hate themselves because they're deeply insecure and want to be seen as perfect. You hold yourself accountable when you screw up, but you don't destroy yourself over it. I get it. Self-hatred feels productive. Pushing yourself beyond what's normal feels like it has a positive through line, but it just doesn't. If you already believe you're a terrible person, then every fuck up just becomes more evidence that you were right all along. And once that happens, there's really no reason to change. You don't expect better from yourself, so you never demand it. I mean, a good example of this is BoJack Horseman. BoJack constantly does awful things. He hurts people, sabotages relationships, and avoids responsibility, but instead of learning from those mistakes, he uses them as proof that he's fundamentally broken. See? I'm terrible. I ruin everything. That kind of thinking feels honest, but it's actually just another form of ego because it turns your failures into an excuse to never improve. Self-hatred becomes a trap. Loving yourself, on the other hand, means something different. It means you believe you're capable of being better. So when you mess up, you hold yourself accountable, not because you hate yourself, but because you expect more from yourself. You believe in yourself. You want to see yourself succeed. And in a strange way, it's about learning to treat yourself the same way you treat a friend. Think about it. If a friend made a mistake, you wouldn't immediately start telling them they're worthless. You wouldn't insist that they're doomed to fail forever. You'd be honest with them, and you'd tell them they messed up, but you'd also want to see them improve and do better. The truth is, you already feel that way about yourself, too. Let me ask you something. Do you want to see yourself succeed? Do you feel hurt when someone treats you badly? Do you feel good when someone praises you, or when you accomplish something you're proud of? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you're already experiencing something important, and that is self-empathy. It's the kindness you extend to your friends, but it's directed at you, and you don't even realize you're doing it. It's small, but it is a sign that you do care about yourself. You do want yourself to succeed. And once you recognize that, something interesting happens. You realize that maybe the problem isn't that you don't love yourself. Maybe the problem is that you don't always like the decisions that you make, and that distinction is important. In truth, I think that the best thing we can do is learn to open up a little bit more, and a good start, I think, is with your male friendships. Spend time with them, get to know them a little bit better on a personal level, have deep talks with other men. You know, it's going to feel a little awkward at first, but once you get into the habit of opening up more formally, it will get easier for you to connect with others. The hardest part for me is trying not to compare myself to other people. I see happy couples and I feel a distinct sense of shame and envy. I can logically understand that other people's happiness is not a threat to my own. In truth, envy is a very addicting feeling. I think on some level everyone experiences it, but there are a few things that help to think about because you don't actually know what it's like to be them. You don't know what they've had to go through to get to this point. I can almost guarantee that most happy, healthy relationships you see aren't that person's first. The truth is, everyone is struggling. Envy is natural. You're not going to eliminate it. The goal is to recognize it and just not let it define you. Remind yourself that everyone struggles even if you don't see it firsthand. Every relationship you have will end until you find one that doesn't. And even then, eventually it will. Because we're not immortal. That's what makes this so exhausting. Putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, asking someone out, all of that takes courage. And rejection, even when it's gentle, can still hurt. It starts to feel like a repetitive cycle. You meet someone, you try, you get rejected, you heal, and then you do it all over again, which is why taking breaks matters. You need to be okay being on your own a little longer, not because you've given up or because you want it any less, but because you need to recharge so that you can put yourself back out there again. But you also do not have the luxury of giving up. It is true that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting shit to change, but love is inherently insane, and that repetitive structure does work if you have the patience to withstand it. And that's the hard part. It is the patience that fucking sucks. Patience is hard to hold on to if you're not in the right headspace. If you're relying on a yes to fix you, or convincing yourself every time that this has to be the one, you're just setting yourself up to crash. The real skill is learning how to rebuild once you get disappointed, learning to be okay with a no, learning to heal and move on when a meaningful relationship with potential fizzles out and doesn't go anywhere. When you're interested in someone, try to approach it with curiosity instead of desperation. Be open to the possibility, but prepared for either outcome. That makes it easier to handle. I expect a no more often than a yes, so when I get a yes, eventually I'm sure it'll feel like a bonus. That's the balance, really. Realistic, but it's not cynical. And honestly, if you have the courage to ask someone out, you already have what it takes to find someone. Rejection is not proof that something's wrong with you. It just means you weren't compatible. That's it. I understand what it's like to be afraid. I'm afraid too. I worry I won't find someone. I crave intimacy, touch, and affection, and those needs are not being met. If you feel that way, I see you. I get it. I cannot promise you that you'll find anyone anytime soon, but there's ways to cope while you wait. Weighted blankets can help because they mimic the feeling of being held. Having a pet can also help, giving you something warm and alive to be close to. And it might sound awkward, but there are support groups for loneliness. Sometimes even small moments of connection, like a hug from a stranger, can make a difference. These are not going to fix your problem, but they will hold you over. They're just ways to make it a little bit more bearable. The truth is, you do not know if you will find someone. That uncertainty is terrifying because you cannot control it. So instead, it's easier to convince yourself that you'll end up alone. In a strange way, it feels easier to accept the worst than to live with the uncertainty, but statistically, that fear does not really hold up. If you want love, the odds are strongly in your favor. In places like the United States and Canada, most people form at least one long-term relationship in their lifetime. Around 85 to 90% marry at least once, and even more experience and meaningful partnership if you include non-marital relationships. Research also shows that while people can go through long periods of being single, very few remain alone for life, usually only a small percentage. Even for those who delay relationships, things change over time. Put simply, the longer you remain open to connection, the more likely it's going to happen. So while timing is unpredictable, the bigger picture does lean in your favor. Life has no guarantees and it can be brutally unfair. Love isn't something you can force. You can't make other people love you, but you can control what kind of person you are. You can improve yourself. You can achieve your goals, look inward, and try to discover just what kind of person you want to be. I always cringe when people say that there are other forms of love beyond just romantic desire because it feels like they're trivializing my very valid and very real desire for a romantic connection. But I also do think it is important not to forget about the love in your life that is there. And I'm not telling you this to dismiss romantic desire, but I am clarifying that it's important to remember that you are loved. Friends, family, community, or even the love of a pet. Sure, it's not the same kind of love, but it's important, and I think on some level it helps to cherish these relationships even if they're not romantic, because without them, if all you have is romantic connection, that's definitely not going to be enough to keep you afloat. If all you had was your romantic partner and nobody else, fuck, that sucks, man. It's not fun. My hope is that this video helped you in some way. Part of what drove me to make it was frustration with the current state of gendered politics, but honestly, it was also personal. I wished I had something like this when I was lost and lonely, and the truth is, I'm still lost and I'm still lonely. I made this because I wanted anyone who feels that way to understand that it isn't just you. You're not broken, you're not cursed to be alone, even though it can sometimes feel that way. I've found love in the past, so I know I'm capable of it, but my brain rarely lets me hold on to that truth. It's always searching for new ways to tear me down, to convince me the evidence doesn't count, and I don't think those feelings are going away anytime soon. I've made a kind of peace with that. There's even a part of me that believes making this video is its own form of healing, that putting those words out into the world means something. But more than helping myself, I hope this helps you, even if only a little bit.